Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining the second day of the Healthy Longevity Global Innovator Summit. We have a full agenda today, so let's just jump right in. We're thrilled to have with us our next visionary keynote speaker, Dr. Eric Verdin. Dr. Verdin is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Buck Institute for Research on Aging. He has held faculty positions at the University of Brussels, the NIH, and the Pickauer Institute for Medical Research. Dr. Verdin is also a professor of medicine at the University of California, San Francisco. Dr. Verdin has published more than 210 scientific papers and holds more than 15 patents. He is a highly cited scientist in the top 1% and has been recognized for his work with the Glenn Award for Research in Biological Mechanisms of Aging and a senior scholarship from the Ellison Medical Foundation. He is an elected member of several prestigious scientific organizations, including the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the American Society for Clinical Investigation, and the Association of American Physicians. He serves on the Advisory Council of the National Institute of Drug Abuse, or NIDA, at the U.S. National Institutes of Health. Welcome, Eric. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Michelle. My turn to thank you for the opportunity to speak at this group. Let me start also by congratulating all of the members of the audience who are here because they have won a Catalyst Award. I think not only congratulations for getting the award, which will allow you to hopefully do exciting work, but also for entering this field of aging research at this time. As I think will be apparent from my presentation, it is a pretty amazing time for aging research. And we're delighted that you're joining our community, and I hope to meet many of you in person. I have been asked to make a presentation, which is a high-level presentation, understanding that a significant fraction of our audience today is made up of scientists, but also of non-scientists, people coming from all stripes of life who are interested in the mission that we are tasked with, understanding aging and hopefully curing it or intervening in it. So I will start by my first slide here to make the point that I truly believe that we are at a historical inflection point, both from a societal point of view and from a scientific point of view. And my presentation will make 4 points that discuss both of these issues. What is happening in society and what is happening in science in terms of aging. And the sort of overarching message that I would like to leave you with at the end is that this is a really unique time. I predict that we will be looking back a number of years from now as the beginning of a revolution in our understanding of aging and our ability to intervene in it. So let's start from a society point of view. My first point is that the populations in the developed world today are rapidly aging. And this is something that we see everywhere, but particularly more acutely in Japan. And I think what this picture shows you is the proportion of different age groups within the Japanese population today. You can see if we look at the last 100 years, from 1920 to 2020, that the fraction of people age 65, which used to represent a very small sliver of the total population, is progressively increasing. Today, it's close to 15 to 20% of the total population of Japan. And correspondingly, the other populations, 15 to 64 and 0 to 14, are progressively decreasing. So that's quite interesting, what has happened over the last 20 years, or last 100 years, actually showing that the population is progressively aging. But what is more concerning is what is going to happen in the next 50 years or 40 years. And so if you look at the projection for 2060, it is predicted that in Japan, at least, the population of people aged 65 will come to represent close to 35 to 40% of the total population. So this is going to be a seismic change in our society. This is what's going to happen in Japan. The same is predicted for Germany. The US is a little behind in this respect. We still have a younger population, in large part due to immigration. So the implication of this is, of course, that society is going to change, that the fraction of our population aging is going to continue increasing. And therefore, there is a sense of urgency in trying to really understand the mechanisms that underlie aging and to hopefully intervene. Second point I want to make, which is linked to this growing aging population, is the fact that aging is the biggest risk factor for the chronic disease of aging. And I want to illustrate this on this slide. If we look at the history of life expectancy of how people were living and dying in the year 1900, you can see that there was a peak, and this is the gray line here, there was a peak of mortality at young age, and then a progressive increase in death until the age around 70, where there was a second peak of mortality. Now, what has happened over the last 100 years, until 2016, what the blue line is representing, is the idea that we have been able, through advances in medical care, to largely suppress infant mortality and also mortality throughout life. And now we have a peak of mortality, which happens in the late 80s in most Western countries. Now, what we could not anticipate is that once you reach these ages, a whole series of complications occur. And many of the diseases that we are confronted with today really did not exist, at least to any significant degree, 100, 150 years ago. And so these diseases that are highlighted here by sort of the red shading are what we call the chronic diseases of aging. And they're listed here. We are all quite familiar with them. Atherosclerosis, leading to heart attacks and stroke, glaucoma, macular degeneration in the eye, many forms of cancer are linked to age, osteoarthritis, osteoporosis, hearing loss, sarcopenia or loss of muscle mass, Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's, type 2 diabetes, and the list goes on. COVID-19 complications, all of these are diseases for which the major risk factor is your age. And this is perhaps even better illustrated on this slide, which shows you the relative number of deaths per 100,000 person per year at each different age group for a whole series of conditions. And what you can see is that there's actually a logarithmic increase in the death linked to many of the conditions that I just highlighted as one ages. Now, the interesting question here that the field is actually addressing is a bit similar to what led to the fame of Newton. And I've taken to highlight what he did because there are many parallels to the situation. You will see on the lower right corner an apple that is meant there, that has been placed there by the artist to represent the fact that Newton obviously worked on gravity. He did not discover gravity. And this is the important thing. He was not the first one to notice that apples fell from trees. The key contribution that he made was to ask why. And the same goes for the disease of aging. Everyone knows that as you get old, you get sick. We've all experienced this through either our parents, our grandparents, our families. And we've all accepted it as part of aging. The question that we need to really address right now is what is it about aging that really leads to this increase in disease? And this is what the field is actually really occupying itself, is really trying to understand the breakdown in molecular mechanism that leads to the occurrence of these specific diseases. I should say that the link between disease and aging is not universal. There are many diseases for which age actually plays a minimal role, or actually where the occurrence might be much earlier. So really what occupies us is trying to understand what is it about the mechanism of aging that leads to this dramatic increase in disease, and can we actually use this understanding to suppress the development of disease and increase lifespan, and not only lifespan, but also health span, the healthy years of lives. So my point number 3 is the fact that I think we can, and I'm not the only one to think this. Our whole field is still relatively young. We've been at it now for close to 30 years, at least the molecular study of aging and its increase in understanding at the molecular level. And so the science of aging is making remarkable progress. We've learned that aging is malleable, much more malleable than we thought it was. And we've been able to identify specific pathways. And these pathways have highlighted a number of key network points where we can actually intervene. And I'll be illustrating this in the next few slides. So what is aging? The consensus today is aging represents a progressive accumulation of damage and injury. And this is highlighted here by the red line, where you can see that throughout our lives, we actually are able to maintain a steady state where the amount of damage and injury and repair are actually in balance. So you can see the repair and the resilience in blue, and you can see throughout middle age, we are able to maintain some degree of balance. Obviously, this balance is not perfect because we know that we age throughout our lives. But what we also see is that towards the end, in older age, there's a progressive decrease in repair and resilience and a corresponding increase in damage and injury. And therefore, the thinking today is that aging represents a progressive failure of our ability to repair damage that occurs either because of gravity or because of irradiation, because of protein misfolding, because of DNA mutations, and so on. Now, I just told you that we've learned that aging is a lot more malleable than we thought it was. And I want to highlight a key experiment from the lab of Cynthia Kenyon and colleagues, which was published in the mid-90s, showing that genes indeed control lifespan. And Tom Johnson, again, was also a pioneer in the field, Lenny Guarente, and those 3 groups really were key in really changing our understanding in aging by showing that single point mutation could actually really contribute significantly to lifespan. And in this experiment, Cynthia and her group have made a single mutation in a gene called DAF2, which is able to almost double lifespan. And remarkably, if you combine this mutation with removal of the gonads in the same worms, you can increase lifespan even much further. And these types of experiments really created an incredible amount of excitement at the time, because they really highlighted the fact that aging was not as rigid as we had thought, and there was actually quite an amazing opportunity to modulate the aging process. Now, some critique at the time, made the point that this is in the worm, that the worm might not be relevant, but even in higher organisms, in mice and other model systems, one is able to modulate aging. And this is actually quite an old experiment conducted by Dr. Clive McKay, who was a professor at Cornell, who was a pioneer in identifying a number of environmental interventions that could actually do the same thing. In this case, he subjected mice to a calorie restriction by decreasing the calorie input, and was able to show that the further you restricted calorie input, the further the lifespan of these animals increased. And this really highlighted another factor, which is equally important to our field, is the fact that we can modulate the rate of aging and lifespan dramatically by environmental modification. And by environmental modification, in this case, it was diet. The evidence is growing that diet is not the sole intervention. Sleep, exercise, drugs are all interventions that are currently being explored in the field for their potential modulatory activities on aging. Now, during the last 25 to 30 years, the field has been quite busy trying to understand, after these initial publications showed that indeed aging was much more malleable, the field has been busy trying to understand what are the pathways that regulate aging. And I want to highlight here some work that was done in a number of laboratories, including our own, going from C. elegans to Drosophila to mammals, and trying to understand what are the molecular players that link calorie restriction with an increased life or lifespan or health span. And what I want to highlight here is the fact that from this work, we've learned a number of key things. One is that these pathways that link calorie restriction to health span and lifespan are actually somewhat conserved between all of these organisms. So studying C. elegans, even though this might seem esoteric and not really applicable to humans, many of the pathways are actually really highly conserved, or at least to some degree. And I want to highlight here, for example, the TOR pathway, which is in yellow, which is key. And not only the TOR pathway, but a drug that targets TOR, rapamycin, a target of, TOR stands for target of rapamycin. And rapamycin itself has been shown to increase lifespan in multiple organisms. And so this not only highlights the importance of studying these model systems, but also the fact that some universality in terms of these pathways and our ability to modulate them. So there's obviously, this is a very small part of the whole field of aging. There are many, many other pathways that are being explored, and I am looking at what the funding of these Catalyst Award is representing is essentially encompassing what is really rapidly growing is a beautiful field of biology. And I think we will learn much more in the coming future. So the last point that I would like to make is the fact that, and this is probably for me one of the most important, by training I'm a physician, I've conducted my whole research career focused on understanding basic mechanism of epigenetic regulation, but the goal has always been at some point to lead to some interventions in patients and to go back to humans. And I think the field of aging is right at that cusp where we know enough to be dangerous in some way, and we know enough from these models to start devising interventions and ways in which we think we can modulate aging in humans. And many of us in the field are actually occupied trying to understand how we're going to do this. Now, what the implications of this are, as illustrated on the next two slides, which we're coming to the end of my talk, is first, I want to highlight the way medicine is practiced today. We live in a highly siloed form of medicine where each of these diseases that are highlighted here is treated as its own condition with its own risk factors. And a good example is heart disease, where a number of risk factors have been identified that includes high cholesterol, sedentarity, obesity, type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, and so on. And so if you have a heart attack, you are actually going to go see a doctor, and he will treat and try to prevent the recurrence of the heart attack. And actually, most people today survive their first heart attacks. But however, as they survive, they continue aging, and all of the factors that eventually led to the heart attack, those mechanisms that contribute to aging, will lead to the occurrence of a second disease of aging, for example, cancer. And the cancer field right now, as you know, due to immunotherapy and drug development, is really undergoing a profound revolution with much more efficacious drugs. And so people survive their cancers. But as they survive their cancers, they will end up living longer, and they become more and more at risk with each passing year for the development of the next disease, Alzheimer's. We know if you reach 80 years old, close to 30% of people will suffer some form of neurodegeneration, and so on and on. So the way our current medical treatment works is first by being reactive. It waits for mostly for disease to occur, and it treats these diseases as if they were independent occurrence. As we know, they are all driven as the major risk factor by the aging process. So what is the field promised to deliver is to really change what we call it healthcare, but actually it would be more appropriately named sick care. It is organ-based, as I just told you, based on heart disease and so on. It is based on a model of anatomy and dissection of organs. It's not based on a molecular understanding of disease pathways. It is highly reactive. It's based on disease management, and it's universal. Mostly people get the same treatment. And so I think what we really want to work on is developing a true healthcare system, which is going to be not based on organs, but based on our molecular understanding of aging pathways, therefore system-based. It's going to be proactive, preventative, and highly personalized. I think this is an incredible challenge. This is not going to happen in the next 6 months, but you are all at the vanguard of what I think will be a revolution in the way we deliver healthcare and think about health in the future. And I will finish by showing you what our immediate goal is. If you look at the traditional life, which is about 77 to 80 years today, people on the top line spend about 15% of their lives afflicted by a number of diseases, so that by the time you're 65, this is when it typically starts. If you look at centenarians, they live not only to 100, but the fraction of their lives occupied being sick is 5% versus 15% in the rest of the population. So that a typical centenarian will be healthy until around 95. Now, that delta between 65 and 95 is really what we are working on today. Now, we will continue. Of course, we want to increase lifespan way beyond this. Right now, our focus is really giving this extra 30 years of healthy lives to everyone we can. And I think it is highly doable. And again, congratulations for getting this award. And I'll finish by allowing all of us to dream a little bit. What would you do with an extra 30 years of healthy lives? I think this is an attainable goal, one that we are working on right now. And again, congratulations. Thank you.